Have you lost your mind? Beta Mrs. Sharma's voice crackled through the video call, her disapproving frown filling Arun's MacBook screen. You want to marry someone without even consulting your parents? Arun Sharma closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the familiar tension headache building behind his temples. At 28, he was a senior software engineer at Microsoft, managed a team of 12 people, and had just closed a deal on a luxury condo in downtown Seattle. Yet somehow, his mother still had the power to make him feel like a chastised schoolboy. Ma, Sarah and I have been together for 3 years, he explained for what felt like the 100th time. You've met her on video calls. She's brilliant, kind and Chinese Mrs. Sharma interjected, as if announcing a terminal diagnosis. Beta, I'm not saying she's not a nice girl, but think about your children. They won't know whether to celebrate Diwali or Chinese New Year. They'll be confused about their identity. The irony wasn't lost on Arun that his mother was delivering this cultural purity speech while wearing a Nike sweatshirt and sitting in her modern Bangalore apartment. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk and Sarah at Mount Rainier, her almond-shaped eyes crinkled with laughter as he tried to take a selfie with both of them and the mountain in frame. The engagement ring had been burning a hole in his pocket that day, but he'd waited another 2 weeks before finally proposing. Sarah and I will teach our children to celebrate everything, Ma. They'll be richer for knowing both cultures. He tried to keep his voice gentle but firm. The world is different now. These boundaries you're worried about, they don't matter as much anymore. His mother's expression softened slightly, but he recognized the calculating look in her eyes. It was the same look she'd worn when arranging his sister Priya's marriage last year. You know, Mrs. Malhotra's daughter is doing her MBA at Columbia. She's very modern, Beta. Beautiful girl, Air 15 in EIT entrance. Why don't you just meet her once? Because I'm engaged, Ma. To Sarah. The woman I love. Arun felt the familiar guilt rising in his chest, the eternal struggle between being a good son and being true to himself. Look, I have a meeting in 5 minutes. We'll talk later, okay? After ending the call, Arun leaned back in his ergonomic office chair and loosened his collar. The Seattle skyline sparkled beyond his window, the Space Needle piercing the late afternoon clouds. His team's code deployment had gone perfectly this morning. He'd just approved the final designs for their new project, and he should have been feeling on top of the world. Instead, he felt the weight of generations of expectations pressing down on his shoulders. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dinner at Canlis tonight? Got something to celebrate. A smile tugged at his lips as he typed back a quick "can't wait." Pick you up at 7. Sarah had been hinting about a major promotion at her UX design firm. She'd worked incredibly hard for it, staying up late perfecting presentations, attending every networking event she could find. That was one of the things he loved most about her determination, her refusal to let anything stand in the way of her dreams. Including, he thought with a twinge of unease, his mother's disapproval. Later that afternoon, as he reviewed pull requests from his team, an email notification popped up. His mother had forwarded him a biodata matrimonial resume complete with photo, educational qualifications, and family background. The subject line read, "Just look once, no pressure." Arun's finger hovered over the delete button, but something made him hesitate. The woman in the photo was objectively beautiful, with the kind of traditional features his mother had always praised: large eyes, long dark hair, a demure smile. Priya Malhotra, 26, MBA Columbia Business School, trained in Bharatanatyam dance, fluent in 4 languages. He closed the email with more force than necessary, angry at himself for even looking. In his bottom drawer, wrapped in tissue paper, lay the red silk tie he'd bought for meeting Sarah's parents next month. Her father was a traditional man too, proud of his Chinese heritage, but he'd welcomed Arun with open arms after seeing how happy Sarah was. "Love is love," Mr. Chen had said over dim sum, surprising them both. Everything else is just details. But as Arun gathered his things to leave the office, his mother's words echoed in his mind. The weight of his family's expectations, carried across oceans and generations, seemed to settle around his shoulders like a heavy shawl. He loved Sarah Hoff, that he was certain. Yet somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice wondered if love alone was enough to bridge the chasm between their worlds. His phone buzzed again. A message from his mother coming to Seattle next week. Already booked tickets. We need to talk about your future, Beta. Arun stared at the message for a long moment, then slipped his phone into his pocket. Outside his office window, the Seattle sky had turned the color of pewter, promising rain. He had 2 hours until he needed to pick up Sarah for dinner, 2 hours to push away the growing unease in his chest and be the man she deserved, the man who had promised to love her regardless of cultural boundaries or family pressures. But as he rode the elevator down to the parking garage, he couldn't shake the feeling that the moment Priya Malhotra walked into the upscale Indian restaurant in downtown Seattle, Arun understood why his mother had been so insistent on this meeting. She moved with the kind of grace that spoke of years of classical dance training, her emerald green silk kurta, a perfect blend of traditional and modern. Despite himself, Arun found his gaze lingering on her fascinating, classically beautiful like the biodata photo had suggested, but striking, intelligent, with eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "I'm so sorry I'm late," Priya said, sliding into the seat across from him and his mother. Traffic on I-5 was terrible. Her accent was pure Seattle tech professional, with just enough Indian lilt to sound exotic rather than foreign. Mrs. Sharma beamed. "No problem at all, Beta. We just got here ourselves." This was a lie. She'd made Arun arrive 30 minutes early, fussing over his collar and lamenting that he hadn't worn the designer kurta she'd brought from India. "Actually," Priya said, her eyes twinkling, "I recognized you from across the room, Arun. Your TED talk on ethical AI was brilliant. I've referenced it in 2 of my MBA papers." Arun felt warmth creep up his neck. The TED talk had been 6 months ago, and while he was proud of it, few people outside his immediate tech circle had seen it. "You're interested in AI ethics?" "Interested. She's doing her thesis on AI applications in traditional Indian handicrafts," Mrs. Sharma interjected proudly, as if she'd personally overseen Priya's academic career. "Tell him about your startup idea, Beta." What was meant to be a quick, obligatory dinner stretched into 3 hours. Priya's startup idea using AI to preserve and modernize traditional artisan techniques was genuinely fascinating. Her understanding of both technology and cultural preservation aligned perfectly with thoughts Arun had been mulling over for years. When she pulled out her iPad to show him her prototype, their heads bent together over the screen, he caught a whiff of jasmine, the same perfume his grandmother used to wear. "We should continue this discussion sometime," Priya said as they were leaving. "Professionally, of course. I could use someone with your expertise as a sounding board." Before Arun could respond, his mother jumped in. "Why don't you come for dinner tomorrow? I'm making my special biryani." Later that night, as Arun lay in bed, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "You've been quiet today. Everything okay?" Guilt twisted in his stomach. He'd missed their usual lunchtime video call, too engrossed in his conversation with Priya, just busy with work and Mom. "Love you." The next few weeks fell into a strange pattern. His mother extended her stay, citing visa technicalities, and somehow Priya became a regular fixture in their lives. She'd drop by with questions about her project, bring homemade sweets that just happened to be Arun's childhood favorites, or join them for impromptu dinner discussions that stretched late into the night. The worst part was that Arun couldn't deny enjoying her company, but Priya understood parts of him that he'd never been able to fully explain to Sarah. The weight of being a first-generation immigrant, the complex dance between tradition and ambition, the unspoken expectations that came with being an Indian son. Sarah noticed the change. How could she not? "Your mum's been here for 3 weeks now," she said one evening as they walked along the waterfront. "We've had dinner together exactly twice, and both times she barely acknowledged me." "She's just traditional," Arun defended weakly. "And she's been busy helping with community events." "Community events?" Sarah stopped walking. "You mean like the dinner party last night that you said was just family, but I saw pictures on your cousin's Instagram. The one where that MBA student your mum keeps talking about was sitting next to you." Arun winced. He'd hoped Sarah wouldn't see those photos. Priya was just there to discuss her project. Sarah's voice was quiet. "You know, you never mentioned she looks like a model. Or that she's living in Seattle now, not New York like your mum originally said." "It's not like that," Arun protested, but even he could hear the lack of conviction in his voice. The tension seeped into every aspect of their relationship. Sarah stopped dropping by his office for surprise lunch dates. Their evening calls became shorter, more perfunctory. Meanwhile, Priya seemed to grow more perfect by the day. She'd bring up memories from India that made him nostalgic, recommend books that seemed to speak directly to his soul, and somehow always say exactly what his mother wanted to hear while maintaining her own identity. But did you know Priya mentioned casually one evening as they walked through Pike Place Market that Sarah asked me to meet her for coffee? Arun nearly dropped the bag of apples he was carrying. What? When? Last week. She wanted to understand more about Indian culture, she said, to try to bridge the gap. Priya's voice was gentle. She loves you very much, Arun. But sometimes love isn't enough if you're pulling in different directions. That night, Arun sat in his car outside Sarah's apartment for 2 hours, trying to sort through the chaos in his mind. His phone kept lighting up with notifications, pictures from his mother of the rangoli she and Priya had made, a worried text from Sarah asking where he was, a message from Priya about a breakthrough in her project. Finally, he typed out a message to Sarah, "We need to talk." Her response came immediately about us, or about the fact that your mother's perfect choice is becoming your perfect choice too. Arun stared at the words until they blurred. Outside, Seattle's perpetual rain picked up intensity, drumming on his car roof like his heartbeat in his ears. He thought of Sarah's laugh, of their shared dreams, of the life they'd planned together. Then he thought of Priya's understanding smile, of his mother's joy when they were all together, of the seamless way his two worlds could merge without compromise. The rain kept falling, and somewhere in its rhythm, Arun realized he'd already made his choice, he just hadn't admitted it to himself yet. Carefully constructed world was about to change in ways he couldn't control. The ring felt impossibly heavy in Arun's palm, a delicate diamond solitaire that had once represented all his hopes for the future. Now, in the soft lighting of Sarah's apartment, it looked like evidence of his failure. "You're really doing this," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. She stood by her floor-to-ceiling windows, silhouetted against Seattle's twinkling skyline, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The same view that had once served as the backdrop for countless happy evenings now felt like a witness to their unraveling. "I'm sorry," Arun managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was strong enough to bridge our differences, but—" "Don't," Sarah turned, and the steel in her voice made him flinch. "Don't pretend this is about cultural differences. We handled those just fine for 3 years. This is about you choosing the easier path. Your mother's path." Her words hit with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Arun opened his mouth to protest, to explain about family duty and cultural identity, about Priya's understanding of his world in ways Sarah never could. But the words died in his throat as he watched tears slide silently down Sarah's cheeks. "Did you ever really love me?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Or was I just your rebellion against tradition?" The question knocked the breath from his lungs. "Of course I loved you. I still—" "Don't you dare finish that sentence." Sarah finally moved from the window, crossing the room to her desk. She pulled open a drawer and removed a small velvet box. Inside was the gold pendant he'd given her on their 2nd anniversary, inscribed with their initials in Hindi. "Take it. Take everything that was supposed to be about our future." "Sarah, please." "You know what's funny?" She let out a hollow laugh. "Last week, I was secretly taking Hindi lessons. I found this amazing teacher who was helping me understand Indian wedding traditions. I wanted to surprise you at our engagement party next month." She pulled out a notebook filled with carefully written Hindi phrases. "I guess I can cancel those classes now." The guilt that had been simmering in Arun's chest exploded into full-blown nausea. He thought of all the times Sarah had tried to embrace his culture, attempting to cook dal, wearing traditional outfits to Indian festivals, even learning to drape a sari from YouTube videos. Meanwhile, his mother had been orchestrating this whole thing with Priya, and he had let it happen. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, knowing how inadequate the words were. "But you did." Sarah's voice was eerily calm now. "And the worst part, you're going to hurt yourself too. You're choosing a life that looks perfect on paper, but you're giving up the chance to build something real, something that could have been beautiful, because it wasn't perfect." The following weeks passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Mrs. Sharma, elated by his decision, threw herself into planning with an enthusiasm that bordered on mania. Priya proved to be the perfect bride-to-be, gracefully navigating between modern sensibilities and traditional expectations. She chose a fusion wedding theme that would blend contemporary elements with classical Indian ceremonies, impressing everyone with her thoughtful attention to detail. But at night, alone in his apartment, Arun would find himself staring at old photos he couldn't bring himself to delete. Sarah at their favorite coffee shop, her reading glasses slightly askew as she concentrated on her laptop. Sarah teaching his niece how to use chopsticks, both of them dissolving into giggles. Sarah in the morning light, her hair a mess, looking at him with such pure love that it made his heart ache. The office became a minefield of memories. Sarah had transferred to another department, but her absence was palpable. The break room where they used to meet for lunch felt haunted. His team, who had loved Sarah and her frequent visits with homemade cookies, treated him with a professional courtesy that felt worse than outright condemnation. Then came the day he saw her in the parking garage, helping someone load boxes into a car. Her laugh echoed off the concrete walls, and for a moment it was like a knife to his heart. The man with her tall, Chinese-American, wearing scrub touched her arm with casual intimacy, and Sarah leaned into him with a smile that used to be reserved for Arun. That's her ex-fiancé, heard her tell the man as he hurried past, pretending to be on his phone. The one I told you about. That night, during dinner with Priya and his mother, Arun found himself struggling to focus on their discussion about wedding invitations and venue options. Priya was saying something about incorporating AI-generated art into the mandap designer, perfect blend of their shared interests, but all he could think about was Sarah's laugh in the parking garage. Beta, are you listening? His mother's voice cut through his thoughts. The caterers need final numbers by next week. Sorry, just tired from work, he mumbled. Priya reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The gesture was perfect, understanding, exactly what a supportive fiancée should do. Her diamond ring larger and more traditional than Sarah's had been caught the light. Don't worry about the small details, she said warmly. Everything will be perfect. Perfect. The word echoed in his mind, taking on a hollow quality. He looked at Priya's flawless smile, at his mother's satisfied expression, at the elaborate wedding plans spread across the table. Everything was exactly as it should be, exactly as tradition dictated, exactly as his family had always wanted. So why did perfect feel so much like loss? The email arrived 3 weeks before the wedding. Arun almost missed it, buried as it was between vendor contracts and guest list spreadsheets. The subject line was simple: what you should know about Priya Malhotra. He nearly deleted it, assuming it was spam or perhaps a jealous acquaintance trying to cause trouble. But something, intuition, fate, or perhaps just wedding planning exhaustion made him click. Dear Mr. Sharma, I work at Columbia Business School's admissions office. Priya Malhotra has never been enrolled in our MBA program. Arun's coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering on his office floor. His hands trembling, he continued reading. The anonymous sender had attached documents, social media screenshots, court records from Mumbai, and most damning of all, WhatsApp conversations between Priya and someone saved as our mate. Everything is going according to plan, Priya had written 2 months ago. The mother is completely convinced, and the son is falling in line. Once we're married, getting the divorce will be easy. NRI husband, American assets, the settlement will set us up for life. Another message: don't worry about the MBA lie. His mother was so eager to find a perfect match, she never even checked. Americans are so trusting. The timestamp showed this conversation had taken place the same evening Priya had sat in his living room, helping his mother plan the wedding menu, her head bent close to his, as they discussed fusion dishes that would please both traditional and modern guests. But it was the next set of screenshots that made his world truly implode. Messages between his mother and Priya's parents, dating back 6 months. Yes, we understand about Amit, his mother had written, but divorce can be managed quietly. What matters is breaking up his relationship with that Chinese girl. Priya just needs to play her part until the wedding. The office around him blurred. Arun barely made it to the bathroom before emptying his stomach. His mother had known. She had knowingly orchestrated this entire charade, not just to break up his engagement with Sarah, but to trap him in a marriage that was based on lies from the very beginning. When he confronted Priya that evening, she didn't even try to deny it. They sat in his car outside her apartment, the same spot where he'd once sat agonizing over breaking up with Sarah. You would never have known, Priya said quietly, all pretense of perfection dropped from her voice. We could have had a good life together, Arun. I would have been the perfect wife, given you the perfect Indian family your mother wanted. Everyone would have been happy. Happy. His laugh sounded hysterical even to his own ears. Living a lie. You're already married, Priya, to someone you apparently love enough to scheme and deceive for. And you're still in love with Sarah, she shot back. We're not so different, you and I. We both gave up real love for the sake of appearances. She removed her engagement ring, placing it on the dashboard. The only difference is, I was honest about my deception. You're still lying to yourself. The confrontation with his mother was even worse. She sat in his living room, surrounded by wedding planning materials, and admitted everything without a trace of remorse. What choice did I have, she demanded. You were going to throw away your heritage, your culture, everything we built for you. At least this way. This way what? Arun's voice shook with rage. This way you could trap me in a fraudulent marriage. With a woman who's already married, who was planning to divorce me and take half my assets. We could have handled the divorce quietly, his mother insisted. Found you another girl, a real match this time. Stop, Arun held up his hand. Just stop. You didn't do this to preserve our culture or protect my heritage. You did it because you couldn't stand losing control. You'd rather see me trapped in a lie than happy with someone you didn't choose. He walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline, the same view he'd shared with Sarah countless times. Somewhere out there she was building a new life, one that didn't include him. The thought, which had once filled him with jealous anguish, now brought a strange sort of peace. I saw Sarah yesterday, his mother said, as if reading his thoughts. At the temple, of all places. She was with a Chinese-American man, learning about Buddhist meditation. She paused. She looked happy, beta, at peace. The words were meant to hurt, but instead they filled Arun with an odd sense of pride. Sarah was still Sarah, still curious, still learning, still embracing new cultures and experiences. While he had been trying to force himself into a mold of perfection, she had continued growing, continued being authentically herself. I'm calling off the wedding, he said quietly. And after that, Mayor, I need you to go back to India. We need space, a lot of it. Beta, please. I'll handle the announcements. I'll deal with the gossip. But I need you to understand something. He turned to face his mother, feeling suddenly calm. What you did wasn't about love or family or culture. It was about control. And I'm done being controlled. That night, after his mother left and the wedding planner had been notified, Arun found himself driving past Sarah's apartment building. The light was on in her unit, and through the window, he could see figures move in. Sarah and the doctor, cooking together in her kitchen. They were laughing about something, their movements in perfect sync, totally unaware of the heartbroken man watching from the street below. As he drove away, Arun realized that his mother had been right about one thing. Sarah did look happy. She had moved on, found someone who was proud to bridge their cultural differences rather than seeing them as obstacles to overcome. She had found real love while he had chased an illusion of perfection. The irony wasn't lost on him that in trying to preserve his culture, he had betrayed one of its most fundamental values, the truth. In pursuing the perfect match, he had lost something genuine and precious. And now, watching Sarah build a new life without him, he understood that sometimes the most traditional thing you can do is be true to yourself, even if that truth isn't perfect. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, Arun sat in his therapist's office, turning a paper cup of water between his hands. The fall rain tapped against the windows, creating a soothing backdrop to their conversation. I think I'm ready, he said quietly. To write to Sarah. Dr. Patel nodded, her expression thoughtful. What changed? I finally understand what I need to say. Arun set the cup down. Not just I'm sorry, but why I'm sorry. Why I made those choices. And most importantly, that I don't expect anything from her in return. The past months had been a journey of painful self-discovery. After the scandal of the cancelled wedding and Priya's deception had rippled through Seattle's Indian community, Arun had thrown himself into therapy. He'd learned to untangle the complex web of cultural expectations, family duty, and personal authenticity that had led to his devastating choices. His mother had returned to India, their relationship now limited to brief, carefully worded emails. The distance had given him clarity. He could see now how her own struggles, as an immigrant, had manifested in an obsessive need to control her children's lives, to create a perfect cultural bubble in a foreign land. That evening, in his apartment overlooking the city lights, Arun opened his laptop and began to write. Dear Sarah, I've written this email 100 times in my head, but nothing seems adequate. How do you apologize for choosing fear over love? For letting others define your happiness? For hurting someone who only ever showed you authenticity and acceptance? I don't expect forgiveness. You've built a beautiful new life, and I'm genuinely happy for you. But I want you to know that you taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, that real love isn't about finding someone who fits a predetermined mold of perfection. It's about finding someone who inspires you to be your most authentic self. I lost myself trying to be the perfect Indian son, and in doing so, I lost the chance to be a good man. You deserved better. We both did. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like, even if I wasn't ready to embrace it. Wishing you all the happiness in the world. Arun. His finger hovered over the send button when a notification popped up on his screen, an email from Sarah. His heart stopped. Arun. I heard about what happened with Priya and your mother from mutual friends. I'm sorry you went through that deception. It must have been devastating. I'm getting married next month. Before I do, I wanted to thank you. Yes, thank you. Our relationship and its ending taught me something precious, that love should never require you to become less of yourself to be more acceptable to others. Kevin and I are having a fusion wedding, Chinese, American, and yes, even some Indian elements. His family has embraced every aspect of who I am, including the parts of Indian culture I grew to love during our time together. We're having Mendi night. Kevin's sisters are extremely excited about this, and I'll be wearing a kippah with Indian-inspired embroidery that my mum and I designed together. I hope you find your truth, Arun. Not your mother's truth, not society's truth, but yours. Be well. Sarah. What? Arun read the email 3 times, tears blurring his vision. Then he deleted his unsent draft. Sarah didn't need his apology or his explanations. She had already found her answers, her peace, her way forward. Instead of dwelling in regret, he opened another document, an application he'd been working on. It was for a non-profit organization he was founding, dedicated to helping young South Asian Americans navigate the complex intersection of cultural expectations and personal authenticity. He'd already received interest from several community leaders and mental health professionals. But the organization's name, Perfect Choice. Not because it promised to help people make perfect choices, but because it would help them understand that there was no such thing. That the only perfect choice was the one that allowed you to be true to yourself while respecting your heritage, not as a constraint, but as a foundation to build upon. At his next therapy session, Dr. Patel smiled when he told her about Sarah's email and his decision not to respond. That's growth, Arun, she said. Understanding that sometimes the best way to show love is to let people move forward without trying to insert yourself into their narrative. I think I finally understand what my mother never could. Arun replied, that our culture isn't a cage to keep things out, but a garden that can grow and evolve. Sarah understood that better than I did. She was willing to add to her identity, while I was afraid of losing mine. As he left the office that evening, his phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Beta, Mrs. Kapoor's daughter, is visiting Seattle next week. Harvard MBA, very modern thinking. This time, Arun didn't feel angry or trapped. Instead, he typed back, Ma, I love you, but I need to find my own way. And when I do find someone, it won't be because they're perfect on paper. It will be because they're perfect in their imperfection, just as I am. He stepped out into the Seattle rain, feeling lighter than he had in months. Above him, the clouds were breaking, revealing patches of blue sky, not perfect weather, but beautiful in its own way, just like the messy, authentic life he was finally ready to embrace.